Good evening. I'm Don Smith of the Smith Family Foundation. Welcome to our tonight's debate on Social Security. And I'd like to, at this point, introduce our moderator, who is Mr. Errol Lewis. He's a columnist at the New York Daily News, and he writes on a wide range of political and social affairs. He's also on TV and radio a lot. Before that, he was associate editor of the New York Sun. And before that, he actually started a credit union in Brooklyn, which he co-founded and led for about 3 years. And in 1996, New York Magazine awarded him one of the 10 top New Yorkers making a difference with energy, vision, and independent thinking. And that's what we need more of, New Yorkers who make a difference. He holds a bachelor's degree from government from Harvard University and a master's degree in political science from Yale. So please join me in welcoming tonight's moderator, Mr. Errol Lewis.
Thanks very much, and thanks for coming out this evening. I have the enjoyable task of moderating this discussion, and I think you'll find it lively and interesting. I'll introduce briefly the four panelists in the order that they will speak, and each will talk to you for about 5 to 8 minutes. At the conclusion of the presentations, I'll ask a few questions to get the conversation going, and I think you'll find it a lively and stimulating discussion. In order, Pat Toomey, who I just discovered seems to have been in the same class I graduated from in college, is the president and CEO of the Club for Growth. Before joining the Club for Growth, Mr. Toomey served as a member of the United States House of Representatives from Pennsylvania's 15th Congressional District. His 3 terms ran from January 1999 through January 2005. He distinguished himself as one of Congress's leading advocates for limited government and personal freedom. Prior to his service in Congress, Mr. Toomey co-founded, owned, and operated 4 very successful original concept restaurants in Allentown and Lancaster, Pennsylvania. After Mr. Toomey speaks, we'll hear from David Certner, who's the Director of Federal Affairs for AARP, the American Association of Retired Persons, and is a member of AARP's senior leadership team. He's been with AARP since 1982 and directs the association's lobbying efforts at the federal level. He also served as chairman of the ERISA Advisory Council of the Department of Labor and was appointed as a delegate to the 1998 and 2002 National Summits on Retirement Savings. He's an attorney and received his law degree from the National Law Center at George Washington University. After Mr. Certner, we'll hear from Herman Cain, who is probably best known as the former chairman of Godfather's Pizza. He served as CEO and president for 10 years and in the process bought the company from the Pillsbury Company. He's also the past chairman and a member of the board of directors for the Federal Reserve Bank of Kansas City and a past chairman of the board of the National Restaurant Association. Right now, he's the chief executive officer and president of the New Voice, Inc., a business and leadership consulting company specializing in speaking and inspirational publications. He's the author of 4 books, the latest of which was published just last month. It's called They Think You're Stupid. Hilary Shelton is the director of the NAACP's Washington Bureau. It's the bureau that deals with the federal, legislative, and national public policy divisions of the 500,000-member organization. Prior to serving as director of the Washington Bureau, Hilary Shelton served in the position of federal liaison and assistant director to the Government Affairs Department for the College Fund, the United Negro College Fund, in Washington, D.C. In that capacity, he worked with Senate and House members of the U.S. Congress, federal agencies and departments, college and university presidents, and faculty members, as well as the White House and various government agencies, dealing mostly with the 40 private, historically black colleges and universities throughout the United States. Born in St. Louis, Hilary Shelton presently lives in Washington with his wife, Paula, and their 3 sons. I'm going to ask the panelists and their experienced speakers, all of them, to hold to 8 minutes so that we don't have to interrupt them on television. And I promise we'll have time for all questions that they and you in the audience might want to ask. So with that, I will turn it over to Pat Toomey.
Thank you, and good evening. And I wanted to thank the Don and Paula Smith for helping to sponsor this. I think it's a very constructive discussion to have about a very timely topic. Social Security program, of course, is one of the oldest and certainly the biggest government program. In fact, it's the biggest government program in the history of the world. Government Social Security program is bigger than many countries' entire GDPs. It affects every single American, and so it shouldn't be surprising that a discussion about profound changes in this program would be a little bit contentious. I wanted to, since I'm going first, I thought I'd start with some of the areas in which we all agree, and then sort of work my way to areas where we probably don't agree. The first thing, which I think everybody agrees, is there's a financing problem for the government with respect to this program. And by that I mean that the system in its current form, with current levels of taxes and current levels of promised benefits, will not be able to honor the promises made to future retirees. On that, I think everybody in this debate agrees. The question is what to do about it. The fact is just not really subject to much debate. It's unchangeable. It's a function of demographic changes in the country and retirees, the numbers of retirees receiving Social Security benefits growing at a rate that's much faster than the new people entering the workforce paying those benefits. Now, the timing of the failure of the system is something that is subject to some debate. Some of the folks who advocate doing less rather than doing more would often like to point to the Social Security Trust Fund and suggest that resources can be drawn from the trust fund to supplement the shortfall in income to make sure that promised benefits are paid. I'd like to stress up front, although this sounds like a very technical issue, in fact, it's important to keep in mind. The trust fund is nothing more than an accounting device. It's a record that's been kept of funds that have been allocated from Social Security to other programs. But there are no resources there. There are no assets backing up the certificates in a filing cabinet. And so while theoretically you can talk about drawing down on this trust fund, all that means is another part of government has to come up with that money somewhere because it isn't lying around somewhere. Now, if your only concern is to fix the government's financing problem, it's actually pretty easy to fix. And in fact, we've been down this road many times before, from when this program was launched and only the first few $1,000s of income was taxed at 2% to the point today where the first $90,000 of wages are taxed at 12%. What we've done is we've cut benefits and raised taxes. All along the way, that's been the solution. But, of course, it's only lasted for a little while, and then we found ourselves back in this dilemma once again. Now, we could go down that road yet again. We could just cut benefits, and you know, you can cut benefits any number of ways. You could rejigger the formula so that starting benefits don't grow quite as rapidly as they're scheduled to grow. You could push back retirement ages. You could do a number of things. Or you could raise taxes in a number of ways. You could raise the rate that's applied to wages, or you could raise the amount of income subject to the tax. But in any case, while those problems would, in fact, solve the government's financing problem in the short run, it would take care of the cash flow, it would actually exacerbate a huge second problem. And that is the fact that what used to be a great deal for workers is now a really terrible deal for young workers and for future retirees. Again, it's a function of the demographics, but the early people who participated in Social Security paid in very modest amounts, and then over the course of their retirement got back many multiples of what they paid in. Today, if you're a 25-year-old average income worker who can expect to live an average life expectancy, the system is promising somewhere between a -1% and a 1% rate of return on all the tens of thousands of dollars it's going to take from that young worker over the course of his or her life. And by the way, it's a promise the system can't keep, as we mentioned earlier. So if you focus on the government's problem and you say, let's solve this financing problem, let's raise taxes or let's cut benefits, you can solve the government's problem, but you make things much worse. You make a bad deal worse for the younger workers who are already looking at a really meager rate of return. A couple of other facts that I think are very important in this, and that is, this gets to be an area where there becomes some controversy. But an objective fact is that there's no ownership of your Social Security benefit. The benefit is defined by law at any point in time based on what Congress and any given president decide it is. And there's actually court cases that have made this very clear. Nobody has any ownership right to their Social Security benefit, no matter how much they've paid in or for how long. it matters not. Your Social Security benefit is defined at the whim of Congress. One of the consequences of that, in my view, is that this system fosters a sense of dependency. It fosters a dependency on government because it's a government that took your Social Security payroll taxes, quite significant amounts of money, over a person's entire working life. And now you need the government, specifically the members of Congress and the President, to make sure that they're going to take care of you in your retirement. That's kind of the deal. It creates a sense of dependency because many people are, in fact, dependent on them. The solution that I advocate, that many people advocate, is to break away from this model, to break away from the model of transferring wages from today's workers to today's retirees, and instead have a system that begins to develop an opportunity for workers to accumulate savings. Specifically, I think it's all about a little bit of freedom, giving younger workers a choice, allowing them, if they want to participate in a new kind of system where a portion of their payroll taxes are put into savings accounts that they own. Now, these would be regulated accounts. They would be required to be diversified. I think you'd have to impose sort of capital preservation models as people approach retirement age. But these are things that could easily be done. And if you allow these accounts to be big enough, well, you certainly solve the problems for the workers. Because a worker now would have an opportunity to accumulate real savings, real ownership, and have a more, in fact, if the accounts are big enough, a more generous retirement benefit than what Social Security currently promises and can't deliver. But the neat thing about this is not only do you establish this more generous retirement system, this ownership for the worker, but you also solve the government's financing problem if the accounts are large enough. The reason for that is just the math of it. It takes about 6 to 7 percentage points of the payroll tax in the terms of accumulated savings to fully replace the promised Social Security benefit for the average worker. We're taking 10 points from that worker now. So the fact of the matter is, if we allow these accounts to grow large enough, the accumulated savings would more than offset the entire necessary Social Security benefit, and a worker would still have an even more comfortable retirement, a considerably more generous benefit than what's currently promised. For the government, there's a short-term cash flow crunch. You know, we've already got a situation where there is soon not going to be enough revenue to pay promised benefits. If we allow workers to divert some of that money, some of that government revenue to personal accounts, of course, it means the shortfall will be greater, and that's a fact. But it's a temporary fact, unlike the current system, which has a permanent insolvency. And the temporary fact of that cash flow shortage, that money can be borrowed, and that can be financed so that we transition our way to a system that is based on personal savings and accumulated wealth. And that, I would suggest, and I'll wrap up because I'm probably about running out of time, but I would suggest that where this gets to be really a difficult and challenging and more controversial issue is over the fundamental direction we want this to go. We currently have a system that is really a collectivist model for retirement, where it's coerced savings, but in fact it's not even savings. It's a coercion of transferring payments, and the government owns it, and the worker has no say. And to break away from that model and to a model where individual workers are the ones in control and who have ownership and have that personal savings, that's a fundamental shift, and that makes many people many people concerned. So I hope later in this discussion we'll get into the substance of that debate, because I think that's what's at the heart of this discussion over Social Security reform. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, everybody, and I also want to thank Smith family for inviting us here this evening to discuss this very important topic. And I want to start by talking about why Social Security is important. I think everybody intuitively knows it, but sometimes it's interesting to just hear some of the numbers around Social Security. For Social Security recipients today, those over 65, about 1 out of every 3 relies on Social Security for just about all of their income. For about 2/3 of all recipients, Social Security is the majority of their income. This is a fundamentally important income program, not just for lower-income people, but for middle-income people as well. And I think the one stat that you probably brings us in the most perspective is just think about what the environment was prior to the enactment of Social Security over 70 years ago. the poverty rate for people over the age of 65 was about 50%, 1 out of 2. Today, that poverty rate has dropped down to 10%, and it's largely, I don't want to say almost entirely, but a very large portion because of Social Security and its cost of living adjustments, which help people stay out of poverty. Now, I think the question is, will Social Security continue to be important in the future? And by all indications, we see, yes, that it will continue to be just as important, if not more important in the future. Now, why is that? Well, let's look around at the other legs of the retirement income stool. We've got pension coverage. Pension coverage in this country is about 1 out of every 2 workers has a pension. That hasn't changed in about 30 years. So pension coverage rates are, in essence, stagnant. But we have seen a dramatic shift in the kinds of pensions people get, from the old traditional guaranteed defined benefit plans to the newer 401k plans, which have really arisen in the last 20 years. But essentially, it's just been a change in the type of pension. We don't really have any more people actually having a pension. Well, what about personal savings rates? Well, anyone who follows any of the statistics on personal savings knows that personal savings rates are down at almost their lowest point in the last century, I think. We're hovering just about 1%. So we've got stagnant pension coverage, we've got lower personal savings rates. Where's this money going to come from in retirement? And unfortunately, the trends that we're seeing is that there's going to be even more reliance on Social Security in the future than it is in the past. So that's why it's so crucial to maintain the retirement program that Social Security provides for people. Now, what's Social Security's condition? I mean, we heard a little bit about it, and there are some numbers, and I think there is general agreement about the numbers, but people talk about them a little differently. Social Security right now has, according to the trustees' reports, has sufficient assets basically to pay full benefits for about 4 more decades. Well, what happens about at the end of that 4 decades? Well, Social Security is not bankrupt in the sense that there's no money there anymore. Social Security just doesn't have enough coming in to meet its currently expected obligations. There's about a 25% shortfall. So even if we do nothing, Social Security will still be able to pay about 3/4 of its benefits throughout the rest of this century. So we know we've got a 25% shortfall that occurs about 4 decades from now. We think that's a shortfall that we can fix with a series of modest adjustments that we make on both the money coming into Social Security, money going out of Social Security, which we need to do because of, as was talked about before, the demographic change. We've got a bulge of baby boomers retiring, and that's a little bulge for a little while, but by and large, people are living longer. So that money either needs to stretch out over a longer period of time, or we need to put more money in the system to accommodate people who are living longer. And those are the trade-offs that we're ultimately going to have to get into if we're going to deal with Social Security's long-term solvency problem. And as I discussed before, we think it's going to be critical that we keep Social Security's foundation of income security. And that's what Social Security is about. It's a foundation of income security for everybody. And it's not just income in retirement either. Social Security provides different kinds of insurance protection as well as retirement income protection because it's designed to provide income protection for you throughout your life. And a lot of younger people who are thinking, well, I'm not going to get Social Security. Well, I got to tell you, 20 and 30 years ago, that's what people thought. You talk to a 65-year-old today about whether they thought 30 years ago they might get Social Security, and the answer is no. They were skeptical as well. Now that they're there, now that they look back and see that their savings is not as much as they would have liked, that their pensions are, if they have them at all, on a lot shakier ground, quite frankly, than they've been in the past, they are incredibly thankful that they still have Social Security as the one guarantee that they can count on. And that's part of what Social Security is designed to do. It provides different kinds of income at different points in your life, depending on circumstances. It insures against someone becoming disabled. And nearly 1 out of every 3 people become disabled before the age of 65. So it provides disability benefits. Should you die, it provides survivor's benefits for your spouse and any surviving children. There's a life insurance benefit built into Social Security that goes along with disability benefits that are worth nearly $250,000 apiece. Social Security, you're also guaranteed you can't outlive the benefit. No matter how long you live, whether it be to 86 or 106, Social Security will still be paying you benefits. You can't outlive it. And there's a cost of living adjustment that goes with it to ensure that you won't fall behind and that you'll be able to keep up and stay where most people are just above the poverty level. Now, I think you heard a little bit before about the Social Security trust funds. Well, right now, Social Security is bringing in a lot more money than is needed. All those baby boomers right now are working and paying into the system. Now, what's happening to a lot of that money? Well, most of the money goes to pay current benefits, but there's additional monies coming in that were designed to help provide a little pre-funding for the system. Now, what's happening with some of that money? Well, right now, that money is all being borrowed by the federal government because the federal government is in deficit with tremendous debt. Now, that is not a Social Security problem. Social Security did not cause that problem. Social Security is helping bail out the federal government. We would prefer that Social Security's monies were not used to bail out the federal government, that Social Security money was kept for Social Security, that it was used for pre-funding, and we have some ideas on how to do that. But for those people who talk about the trust funds and them not being real, they're only not real because people are borrowing the money and saying that Treasury bonds are no good. Well, I assume that a lot of you out there also own Treasury bonds, either directly or through any of the funds that you might hold, own Treasury bonds. We expect the federal government would make good on those payments. And quite frankly, if they're not going to make good on those payments, there's a real question about whether they should be borrowing that money in the first place. So I think the trust funds are a lot more real for Social Security than some make them out to be. Now, the question is about private accounts. Will private accounts do anything to help? Well, from our perspective, not only do they not help, but they actually hurt the situation. We have a long-term solvency issue with Social Security. There's not enough money coming into the system. So what's the first thing we shouldn't do? The first thing we shouldn't do is take money out of the system. And that's what private accounts carved out of Social Security will do. You take money out of Social Security to establish private accounts. Well, that doesn't make sense. Social Security will now be in worse shape. The insolvency dates for Social Security all move up. Social Security will be much further in debt, will be much less likely to make its payments if you take money out of Social Security. So that's a fundamental problem with taking the money out of Social Security. Private accounts are a great idea. We think we should have people save. We think we should have people invest. But we have a whole system already designed in this country to do that. And ARP has been pleased to have been part of the system that's created 401k plans and IRAs, and everyone has access to an IRA. We'd like to have more people have access to 401k and other kinds of payroll deduction mechanisms so they can have that savings. But if we really, truly want to improve retirement security, and that ultimately is the goal, you can't just move money from one pot to the other. The idea of private accounts is moving money from a guaranteed benefit to a risk-related benefit. Well, it's the same money, it's just you have a lot more at risk. That means there's going to be winners and losers. What we need to do is shore up Social Security and make sure that we get more people to save more so that we actually have more people with both kinds of assets, both a strong Social Security and personal savings. That's how we'll get stronger retirement security in general in this country. And that's why we've built up an entire private system of IRAs and 401k plans that now has trillions of dollars designed just to do just that, to have individual accounts for people to save and invest. And we think we need to build up both of these systems, not try to get people private accounts by tearing down the guaranteed benefits. Well, let me stop there. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
I, too, would like to thank Don and Paula Smith for this opportunity, and would like to thank you for coming out. And hopefully, some of the things that we have to say may help all of us to be more enlightened on this very critical subject. When our founding fathers said that we are all endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and ownership. Because if you do not own your time, your talent, and your treasure, you cannot pursue happiness. Our founding fathers believed that ownership, just like the pursuit of happiness, is an unalienable right. We've talked a lot about the Social Security system, and I'm sure that many of you have read a lot about it. Started in 1935. But what some people fail to point out is that by 1945, the assumptions had changed. It didn't assume people living longer because of advances in medical science. It didn't assume the impact of baby boomers. It did not assume those things 70 years ago, and now we are faced with a situation that will implode if we don't do something about it. I happen to take issue with David, Mr. Certner, who says that for 4 decades, we really won't have a problem. Well, that same Social Security trust, the Social Security trustees, they also said that in the year 2017, there would be more money going out than money coming in. That means we will have a cash flow problem. And every year after that, that means that the debt will just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Well, how did we get in this mess? And I don't believe we ought to wait another 4 decades before we try to fix this mess. And it is our mess because we have allowed it to continue to grow and grow and grow. And now there are some who would like to continue to ignore the problem and put another Band-Aid on it. Because if all you're going to do is raise taxes and reduce benefits or play a shell game with life expectancy or retirement age, it's another Band-Aid on the problem. My grandmother used to tell me the story about a frog. If you take a frog and you put it in a pot of boiling water, it'll jump out. But if you take a frog and you put it in a pot of cold water, and then you add just a little bit of heat, that frog will adjust to that little bit of heat. And once that frog adjusts to that little incremental amount of heat, you wait until it gets used to it, and then you add a little bit more heat. And when the frog gets used to that little bit amount of heat that it almost cannot notice, that's when you increase the heat a little bit more. And if you do this for a long enough period of time, with small enough increments of heat, eventually the frog will boil to death. That's what's happening to Social Security. And to continue to wait and to continue to add a little bit more heat, which is code for less raised taxes and less reduced benefits, we will simply wait long enough. If we don't fix the problem, we will simply boil the frog to death. Not only will those who are dependent upon Social Security not get any benefits, but the younger workers won't get a dime either. There's one other big fallacy with the current system, which is dysfunctional, that I would like to point out. Yes, it has some issues. When it started in 1935, the average life expectancy of a black male was 51. The average life expectancy of a white male was 61. But yet you don't get benefits until you're 65. Somebody knew something then that they didn't tell everybody. But even today, the average life expectancy of a black male is 68. The average life expectancy of a white male is 75. So in 70 years, that gap has only changed by 3 years. So this means that some of us are disproportionately putting the same amount of money in, but yet it is unlikely we aren't going to outlive those benefits, with all due respect, that Mr. Certner talked about. Now, I'm not suggesting that this is a black problem, that this is a white problem. This is a green problem. Instead of putting another Band-Aid on it and leaving this discrepancy in there, let's fix the problem. It's bad for everybody, but it is worse for black people in this country. Solutions. I happen to support the idea of optional personal retirement accounts. And unfortunately, it appears as if the media and some of those who want to continue to put Band-Aids on it simply seem to be ignoring this word optional. Secondly, all of the proposals that have actually been introduced in Congress, I'm not talking about the bantering that goes back and forth on some of the TV shows. It basically will not take money out of Social Security. It will simply allow people the option to use some of their money in the first place. You see, one of the dirty little secrets that many of those who understand this system don't want us to know is that they have already spent that money. And I think David has alluded to that. It's optional personal retirement accounts. And the evidence is overwhelming that this could long-term solve the problem. Could 75 economists across the country be wrong when they said that optional personal retirement accounts would work? When 5 or 6 of these were Nobel laureates in economics? Could the employees of the municipal employees of Galveston, Texas be wrong when they opted out of personal retirement accounts back in 1981? Could the small country of Chile be wrong? Could they be a lot smarter than us, that they believe that their citizens can handle some controlled investment accounts? Could they have been wrong in 1981 when they went to a system of optional personal retirement accounts, and today their entire system is solvent, and the average Chilean worker retires at 80% of what they were making before they had to retire? versus that group of 1/3 people that David referred to who rely totally on Social Security. If you are lucky, you will retire at about 40% of what you were making before you retired. And could our elected representatives in Congress and the United States Senate be wrong, since they have an optional personal retirement account system called the Thrift Savings Plan? Could they be wrong? Are they saying to us it's good for them but not good for us? I don't think so. And I believe that it is high time that we face the problem and fix the problem rather than continuing to put another Band-Aid on it. We don't lack the skill to fix this problem in this country. We lack the will, and that will require leadership. We are fortunate in that we have a president who has made this issue a top priority. We now need the leadership on the part of Congress as well as the leadership of you and me and all of the other citizens to put pressure on our elected leaders to solve the problem and not put on another Band-Aid. Because as the former Senator Everett Dirksen once said, and I'm closing, until they feel the heat, they won't see the light. We have got to turn up the heat so they see the light. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a hard act to follow. But on behalf of the NAACP, our nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization, I'd too like to thank Donald and Paula Smith Foundation for this wonderful forum so we can begin this discussion over the issues of Social Security. But before we can address the strategies to keep Social Security solvent, we must be reminded of the Social Security intentions, that is, the historic intentions of Social Security, as well as its present and future mission. Specifically, for the purposes of my presentation this evening, the specific needs of the African American community as well as other communities throughout the United States, we must begin with the need of Social Security in the first place. According to the Social Security Administration website, Social Security works because it speaks to the universal human need. All peoples throughout all human history have faced the uncertainties brought on by unemployment, illness, disability, death, and old age. Social Security is designed as a community response to these uncertainties. Since 1935, Social Security has kept generations of Americans out of poverty by providing a base for retirement and a true sense of security. Social Security remains one of the most important and successful anti-poverty programs ever undertaken by the U.S. government for its citizens. All three Social Security programs, retirement, disability, and survivor benefits, are disproportionately important to the economic survival of African Americans as well as other Americans throughout our country. Americans of color have traditionally been at the low end of the earning scale over our lifetimes. We are historically more apt to have pursued physically demanding jobs and have a lower life expectancy as well as a higher rate of disability than the average American. As a result, we are more likely to depend on Social Security for our economic well-being, if not our very survival. To understand just how necessary Social Security is to the well-being of our communities, let's look at some basic facts. Social Security is the only source of income for 1 in 3 African Americans over the age of 65. Without the guaranteed Social Security benefits they receive today, the poverty rate among older African Americans would more than double, pushing more African American seniors into squalor and poverty during the most vulnerable years of their lives. Almost 80% of African Americans over the age of 65 depend on Social Security for more than half of their income, and more than half rely on it for 90% or more of their incomes. 1 in 5 married African American couples rely on Social Security for their entire retirement income, 2 times more than our white counterparts. African Americans between the ages of 50 and 59 are nearly 2 times as likely as other workers in that age group to become disabled. African American children are almost 4 times as likely to be lifted out of poverty by Social Security benefits than our white counterparts. As a result of these crucial circumstances, the NAACP has been actively involved in the debate over the extreme, dramatic, and reckless changes being promoted by the White House to the American people on the Social Security system. Let me state unequivocally that the NAACP is firmly opposed to any change in the Social Security system which might result in an increase in vulnerability or in a decrease in the guaranteed benefits that American seniors, disabled, and survivors currently receive from our Social Security system. When you take all these aforementioned facts into consideration, it becomes clear that despite the rhetoric, the proposals that we have seen thus far from the White House would cause disproportionate and irreparable harm to the African American community. First, the president's proposal would eliminate the progressive benefit structure. The Social Security structure currently in place gives more help to the lower age workers than it does to those in higher wages. Since minorities tend to earn lower lifetime incomes than whites, an elimination of the progressive benefit structure would disproportionately affect and harm us. The Bush proposal that we have seen thus far also raises the age of retirement for the American worker, significantly cutting benefits for disabled workers, and according to the Congressional Budget Office, will result in significantly lower benefits for all workers. I would also like to take a minute to specifically address the myth that privatization helps African Americans. This contention is false at best. First, the notion that African American men have a lower life expectancy and are therefore not reaping their due benefits from the current Social Security program is fundamentally flawed. These statistics are based on the life expectancy at birth and serve to illustrate disparities in infant mortality rates of African Americans, as well as the death rate of African American males between 14 and 24 because of gunshot wounds. If you want to do something to address the life expectancy rate of African Americans, why indeed would you allow the assault weapons ban to sunset, and why would you cut the budget to the minority health program at Health and Human Services in Washington, D.C.? If you want to help us, but don't offer us this ridiculous assumption. And in the unfortunate event that individuals die before the normal retirement age, the Bush privatization plan will not provide more or better assistance to surviving spouses and our children than currently available under Social Security. In fact, according to a report by a group of African American economists, a typical African American male who dies in his 30s would only have enough money saved in a private account to cover less than 2% of the survivor benefits that his spouse and children can now get under current law, less than 2%. Moreover, the family would not receive any income from the private account until the surviving spouse reaches retirement age. Lastly, we have a concern that privatization will result in all Social Security beneficiaries paying more for the administration of the program and thus receiving less, paying more for the administration of a private account program and thus receiving less. So, what are the answers to saving and strengthening Social Security? Let me begin by saying, first, slow down. There's no need to rush to judgment. Even conservatives argue that the Social Security life expectancy and solvency expectancy will go on for at least another 45 to 50 years. Slow down. Indeed, we don't want to see the kind of rush to judgment that we experienced when we sent troops into Iraq. We don't want to experience the kind of rush to judgment that we experienced when now, if we took very well the $80 billion that the Bush administration came back and asked the American people for after filing their budget, and then again it came and asked for another $80 billion that the Bush administration asked for again after filing their budget to pay for more of the destruction and then reconstruction of Iraq, then indeed Social Security will be in fine hands. Let me leave this as my last point. Finally, when the previous administration was leaving office, we were running into the trillions of dollars of surplus. That's like money in your savings account drawing interest. But when this administration came into power, they decided to first give that money back to the wealthiest of Americans rather than fixing Social Security first. This is not the administration that should be making any decisions about what happens with our money. Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank all of our speakers for keeping to their time and for framing the issues for us nicely. I want to make sure that we don't talk past each other, and I do want to make sure we don't have any issue creep. We're going to stick to Social Security tonight. I say that only because there are a couple of lawyers up here, there are a couple of successful businessmen up here, there are a couple of politicians up here. You never know where things are going to go. Let me start with a question for Herman Cain. You talk about optional personal retirement accounts, and you talk about the right, or depending on how you look at it, the obligation to manage one's own wealth, one's own benefits. But as a businessman, you also know very well the risks that are lurking out there in the market. So what would happen to a person who directly or indirectly ended up investing in a company like Krispy Kreme Donuts, which was trading near $50 a share in 2003 and closed under $8 today?
I'll take that question. First of all, there have actually been 2 pieces of legislation introduced in the United States Senate, and not one of them suggested people invest money in a single stock. That is simply misleading information. Secondly, the same plan that is used by our congressmen and senators, it has certain restrictions. It has certain controls on it. A person working for working for a federal worker or someone that's a senator or a congressman, they are able to put money into the thrift savings plan. And by the way, we match up to 5% of everything that they put in there as citizen taxpayer dollars. They put it in here and they choose from plan A, B, C, D, and E. How hard is that? So not one of the plans suggests that someone would go out and recklessly invest in a single stock. That's simply not what's in the actual plan.
Let me also,
Can I just jump in on that
Yeah,
for a
sure.
second? Because this is the second time that a reference has been made to the federal plan, the federal thrift savings plan. And I'm going to agree with my colleague. The federal thrift savings plan is a good plan. It's the one for members of Congress and the federal workforce. It's a savings plan where they make contributions. They get matches by the government. They get 5 choices. There used to be only 3. They've now expanded it to 5 choices to pick and choose from. Many people have contributed to that plan. Many people have built up nice savings in these accounts. And I think the program works really well. What you need to understand about the federal thrift savings plan is that it's in addition to Social Security. Nobody had to give up a single dollar of their Social Security. Nobody had to put any money of their Social Security at risk. This was an additional savings incentives to get people to save more in addition to Social Security. It's a great idea. We should be doing it for everybody. We shouldn't be telling people they have to give up their Social Security benefit, take on trillions of dollars of new debt in order to have more individual savings. You talk about an option for people to save. Everybody's got an option to save now through their individual retirement accounts. What people don't need is an option that they don't choose, but the cut is mandatory. The savings may be optional, but the cut that everybody would get is mandatory.
Well, even you said that there was a lot of people who depend totally on Social Security, and because of the reduction in savings rate that you pointed out, they don't have money to put into an additional plan in order to add on to it. So there's a very large percentage of the people. And one other thing before we go on, that this is a matter of just setting the record straight. First of all of the plans that have actually been introduced in Congress, they do not touch survivor and disability benefits. That's about 30% of Social Security. It's only talking about the option on the other 70% if someone chooses. So none of those plans, including Mr. Bush's idea, touch survivor and disability benefits.
Yeah, the other point I want to just follow up on this, the thrift savings plan is a great plan. It works fine for people who have enough income that they can afford savings. 50% of all Americans today have no accumulated savings because they live paycheck to paycheck, and we take 10% of that paycheck and we send it to Washington and say, well, just hope for the best, and maybe when you retire, the 535 members of Congress will make sure you've got a nice benefit. The fact is these people have no opportunity to accumulate savings, and that's what Social Security reform would enable them to do. A quick word about the equities and the scenario about investing in a stock. Well, Herman is absolutely right. Every plan that's ever been contemplated requires enormous diversification and investment in broad funds, not individual stocks. But let's think about what the standard of comparison should be here. We heard earlier on that even the opponents of reform acknowledge that the Social Security system has to cut benefits by 25%. That's if you think that the trust fund has any meaning, which it doesn't. There's never been a 20-year period in American history where a diversified investment in our capital markets has failed to yield a positive rate of return. Why do we shrug our shoulders and say somehow it's acceptable to look at a 25% benefit cut under the current system?
let me ask as a follow-up question along those same lines for both Pat and for Herman. Don't we know from experience that when employees are offered a chance to take control of their retirement benefits, say a 401k, they often pass on it? I mean, I've seen numbers, studies showing shockingly low rates of active involvement in 401k plans, and there's even experience with some municipal workforces where they had hybrid retirement plans that gave them some choices, and the workers just didn't get involved. I mean, 80% non-involvement in some cases.
Well, two things. One, as Herman mentioned earlier, the country of Chile offered this option to workers back in 1980. almost immediately some 95% of workers chose this. But at the end of the day, I'm not that concerned about what percentage of people opt in. I want to give workers the choice. I want that decision to be in the hands of the individual worker to decide how his retirement program will work, rather than have the government force him into a system that he doesn't believe is going to work for him or her.
I would like to respond to that, because I am concerned about who opts in and who opts out. Because chances are, as you noted, the ones who are more likely to opt out are those who understand the capital markets better. They tend to be better off workers. That's what we've seen in 401k plans. If you're lucky enough to have a 401k plan, which tend to be better off workers to begin with, you still only get about 70% participation rates in those systems. But it's good to have that option in the private sector, and that's where we should keep it. The problem with Social Security is every dollar that opts out of the Social Security system is $1 less available to pay benefits today. 90% of the benefits, or the money going into Social Security now, goes right back out to pay benefits for current retirees. The more money you start drawing out of Social Security, the less money is going to be available to pay current benefits today, right now, to current beneficiaries. How do you make up that money? With trillions of dollars of new debt. That's what most of these proposals are talking about, borrowing trillions of dollars to make up that money. Now, who's going to pay that trillions of dollars? Well, it's the same people who are trying to opt out of the system are later going to have to pay back all that debt that they've built up. So you can't talk about this as being some kind of a free lunch. The money is going to have to come from somewhere.
No one said it was going to be a free lunch. In 2017, that's when the trillions of dollars of debts are going to start. Secondly, while there is a surplus now, let's fix the problem now. And thirdly, no one who takes the option to use a portion of their money, it's not taking it out of Social Security, it's their money in the first place, to put it in an account. It's not the government's money.
I've got a question along those lines for you, David. There was a Harris poll released last week that showed a kind of a contradiction. Less than 40% of all adults in America approve of President Bush's proposals, but 50% like the idea of allowing people to invest part of their Social Security funds in stocks or bonds. How do you sort of work those kind of contradictions?
I think most of America believes in the Social Security system. You wouldn't have Social Security with such high approval ratings and a most successful program in the nation's history, paid benefits on time for 70 years, lifted tens of millions of people out of poverty. And this is a program that is basically loved by the American people. It's grown in acceptance by the American people, and it's because they see it. They see it in their towns, in their communities. They see it in their families. If they're not getting the benefits, then either their parents or their grandparents or somebody they know in the community is getting benefits. People know the Social Security system works. They want to keep the Social Security system. They like the security that Social Security provides. That's what that system is designed to do. Some people here are talking about a different kind of system, a system of investment and risk. There's a place for investment and risk. That's why we've created these private sector systems. That's why we have 401k plans and IRAs and lots of other kinds of systems for private savings, all optional, all that we encourage people to do and get into. Social Security is not the system for taking on risk. Think of Social Security as the bond portion of your portfolio. Think of it as an insurance policy. It's just not the system for risk. That's the contradiction in terms. People like saving and investing, but they like the security and the guarantee of Social Security. And that's why we need to encourage both, but not to encourage the savings and investing at the expense of Social Security.
What do you say to those younger workers who are going to put money in there and not get a dime, if anything, by the time they retire? Let's solve the problem. This is what I'm talking about. All of the solutions that I've heard, relative to that is simply saying, well, let's just add another Band-Aid, or let's just wait until this frog boils to death.
And the only way you could say that Social Security system doesn't have a risk is if you acknowledge the certain loss. I mean, the fact that this system cannot deliver on its promised benefits. Nobody's pretended that it can. That's a pretty bad deal.
We're still looking for a program that actually will provide the services we want to provide. It seems that this administration and the particular argument we're getting from you has already conceded the point that we can't fix the program and continue to allow the level of benefits we're providing now. But what we're seeing consistently is a cutting into Social Security funding. What we're seeing consistently is other things taking priority, other expenditures coming out of the public troughs being paid for rather than putting those resources and a new spin on the Social Security program as we know it now. Indeed, I hear what you're saying about being able to guarantee or save what we have now, and we want to save it as well. But it seems like you're going to be screwing poor people in the process, in your mind, of being able to save Social Security. You can get solvency in Social Security if you're willing to cut a whole lot of people out of the program, but that's not what the program is here to do. What we're looking for is a safety net that will provide the security for the American people, that regardless of how bad things get, indeed you'll have some support. My guess is those people at Enron and WorldCom that invested their life savings into their companies, into private accounts, very well thanking God for the safety net of Social Security, because they have absolutely nothing now except Social Security.
I think you've got to acknowledge what the president has acknowledged, that private accounts do nothing to address the problem you're laying out. The problem is long-term solvency of Social Security.
Absolutely.
Private accounts don't do anything to address that problem. The president has acknowledged that private accounts don't address the solvency problem. It's a different risk-related way of delivering benefits, but it doesn't do anything to address solvency.
With all
No,
due
you address-
respect,
Go
you
ahead.
address solvency by discontinuing taking the Social Security dollars out to be buying bridges in South Dakota. That's how we got into this mess. That's why we have this problem. You know, Congress has to exercise some spending discipline, and when they started taking the money out, this didn't just start, by the way, Hillary. You know, this started decades ago, where they've been going in and taking that money out to subsidize other things. That's a different problem, and the way you fix that problem is we got to be able to get them to stop the spending.
We've got to address the priorities, because don't forget, the budget is first handed down by the White House and then addressed by the Congress.
Hillary, I have a question for you. Let's go beyond the politics of the moment and push this issue out maybe a few decades. Are you, in a broad sense, assuming a kind of helplessness on the part of working people? I mean, is there ever a point where they might be able to learn to invest and control their own benefits?
I think absolutely so. There's no question about it. I know working people, and I come from a working class family. My father's always invested in property and other things. He works very hard to make sure he took care of all 7 of us and getting us through college and those kind of things. There's no question about it. But working people, I believe, are in the majority of folks that are against allowing this kind of tampering with Social Security. Isn't it their opinion as well, when we look at the polls coming out from CNN, the polls coming from USA Today, that say that the majority of Americans do not support these particular changes in the Social Security program?
Since you raised the polls, let's set this straight. CNN, ABC, Newsweek, and Time, they didn't ask the right question. This is why you have this dichotomy. No. Right. They didn't ask the right question. The question in those polls, and I quote, was, what do you think of President Bush's handling of Social Security? Number one, he is not handling Social Security. He's trying to fix it. And number two, if you didn't vote for President Bush, don't you think they're going to say they don't approve of the way he's handling Social Security? But if you go, wait a minute, if you go to a Fox poll that asks, do you believe people should have the option to invest a portion of their payroll taxes, then you get an overwhelming 60% of the people who say, yes, they believe that people should have the option. You've got to ask the right questions.
Well, I agree. But in all fairness, let me say 2 things to that. Number one is we talk about the level of investment. That's going to be very important to how much is invested in a private investment account and how much of it's going to be stable in Social Security. Number 2, the reason they may have asked that question is because when Bush was asked in his first administration what he was going to do about Social Security, his question was, is that a government program? Do you want that man making decisions?
Let me
We're talking about Social Security.
Yes, we are.
Let me put this out there for anybody who'd like to take it. That same Harris poll that I mentioned that was released last week showed that only half of all adults know that Social Security guarantees payments for life. And almost half of all American adults don't know that Social Security has never failed to pay benefits. How do we get a public debate going if people don't really even know the basics?
Well, I think what's important also to look at is some of the, what's interesting is you look at some of the age breaks in some of this polling, and I think everybody knows that there's a big difference in age breaks between what a 25-year-old and a 65-year-old thinks about the Social Security system. If you ask a 25-year-old where they're going to get their retirement income, they're telling you, well, most of it will come from my pensions and savings, very little bit will come from my Social Security. Well, by the time you get to 65, you know what the reality is. You know you don't have the kinds of savings you wished you'd had. I can tell you very few of my members say, you know, we really saved too much over our lifetime. You don't hear that, and you know that. And so people don't have the savings or the pensions, and they understand how important and how critical Social Security is. And when our members, who are all over the age of 55, and supposedly all over the age where the President has said we're not going to touch the benefits for the people over the age of 55, Now, even if people believe that, and I think some are, question whether that's possible, but even those who may believe that and think they're not going to be affected, they very clearly say this program is too important, too many lives. We shouldn't be messing with it. It's a fundamental income guarantee that keeps millions of Americans out of poverty, and we want people to save and invest. But when you get to age 65, you understand the reality, and that's why so many people who are older outright just reject this notion of private accounts. People who are younger are more open to it because they haven't lived through the reality of their lives yet.
Let me say one thing about the polling. I think it's important to keep in mind, the vast majority of Americans are busy working hard, raising a family, running their business, working for a business, whatever they're doing. The vast majority don't have time to read a whole lot of extensive policy reports and study up on public policy issues. We've been having a national debate about Social Security for about 5 months. That's not a terribly long time, but that's how long it's been that it's been a priority for the administration and a front burner issue for the public. The more the American people understand, the more they are going to come to accept a very simple premise, I believe, which is why not let the workers decide? You guys obviously don't like the idea of personal accounts at all. I know you don't like that. I know you think people perhaps won't invest well, whatever. But why can't that be up to the worker? Why should it be up to you or the federal government?
That's going to...
I'll respond to that very quickly by just saying, again, we like personal accounts. They just shouldn't be done at the expense of Social Security. And every worker in this country has an option to save through their IRA or through their other personal savings account.
After we've taken the Social Security taxes from these workers, half of them have nothing left over to save.
And are you saying that the workers, this is what I don't understand, are you saying that the workers in this small country of Chile were much more intelligent than the people in this country all the way back to 1981? I don't get this connection here.
And
Well,
that's
I'm
clearly not
gonna-
what's being said.
I am going to let that be the last word for our panel discussion. I want to thank our guests for helping us to move the debate along and get some discussion going, because there really are a lot of people who I think are just coming into this 5-month debate, this national debate. So I'd like you to join me in thanking Patrick Toomey, David Certner, Herman Cain, and Hilary Shelton.